Number 12, Richard Prosser.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Minister of Trade. What trade benefits has the government negotiated for New Zealand's forestry industry?
The Honourable Stephen Joyce.
Mr Speaker, on behalf of the Minister of Trade, New Zealand's forestry industry has benefited significantly under our free trade agreements, and I thank the member for his question. For example, under the ASEAN Australia-New Zealand FTA, our forestry exports now have tariff-free access to the markets of Brunei, Indonesia, Malaysia, Singapore and Thailand. Thanks to the New Zealand-China FTA, 97% of our exports enter China tariff-free. At 1st of January 2017, all of our exports will be tariff-free into the Philippines. Under the Korean FTA, 90% of our forestry exports are now tariff-free, with the remainder being scheduled to be eliminated within the next 10 years. And through TPP, we've negotiated the elimination of all tariffs on New Zealand forestry and forestry products. This notably will include Japan, New Zealand's 4th largest export market, the US, our 6th largest market, and Vietnam, our 11th largest market. TPP would result in an estimated $11 million in annual tariff savings for the sector when it's fully implemented.
Supplementary.
Supplementary question, Richard Prosser.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. To the Minister, why, after nearly 8 years in government, have they not got rid of the 17% value-added tax imposed by the Chinese government on New Zealand's sawn timber and value-added timber products under the China FTA?
The Honourable Stephen Joyce.
Well, Mr Speaker, on behalf of the Minister of Trade, every country reserves the right to put sales taxes and VATs and GSTs on their products, and that's not likely to change because the member would be very upset, for example, if one of our trade partners told us we had to take GST off one of their products which was sold in the country. So it is China's right in which to do that, and I understand that every imported product going into China is subject to the same VAT.
Supplementary.
Supplementary question, Richard Prosser.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. To the Minister, will he ensure that the renegotiated free trade agreement with China supports New Zealand regional timber processors by removing China's 17% VAT on our manufactured wood products? If not, will his government ask the WTO to challenge China on its use of many non-tariff barriers, which include building codes that don't allow Pinus radiata?
The Honourable Stephen Joyce.
Well, Mr Speaker, on behalf of the Minister, the member asked a number of questions there. Firstly, in relation to VAT, I've already answered that in the previous supplementary. It's not something that New Zealand can demand of our trade partners in terms of their taxation systems. But in relation to non-tariff barriers, the member raises a reasonable point, and the Wood Council, as we know, has put out a report today which officials are already looking into in terms of the things that can be achieved there. But it probably doesn't need to be done under the FTA upgrade. There are ways of resolving the NTB issues in individual industries. The member is simply wrong, and he is continuing to be the worst opposition MP in 50 years. And the non-tariff barriers work the government is doing is actually comprehensive, and Dr Clark needs to find a job.
He's the Lord Mayor of his generation.
Supplementary. Supplementary.
Order. Order. Supplementary question, Richard Prosser.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. To the Minister, given that China's imports of softwood logs fell by 16% by volume and 20% by value in 2014-15, is he concerned that the bulk log trade may be at risk of a dairy commodity-style price correction?
The Honourable Stephen Joyce.
Well, Mr Speaker, I'm not sure the members, on behalf of the Minister of Trade, I'm not sure the members' figures are exactly correct. The most current figures suggest, as I recall, I'm doing this from memory, that those numbers, exports from New Zealand, are up. But every commodity has risks attached to the cycle. It doesn't matter which commodity we're talking about. But I'm confident that industries actually are able to manage those risks. And in the case of the forestry industry, the member will be pleased to know that the level of processed timber that goes offshore through the New Zealand export sector is actually as high, in fact slightly higher than it was 7 or 8 years ago.
Supplementary.
Supplementary question, Richard Prosser.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. To the Minister, does his government understand that supporting timber processing in the regions not only creates jobs for New Zealanders, but also provides New Zealand with higher value products to export and trade, and therefore increased export receipts, higher per capita GDP, and an improved balance of payments? And if so, why isn't he doing it?
The Honourable Stephen Joyce.
Well, Mr Speaker, on behalf of the Minister of Trade, the government agrees that processing is good, and I would note for the member a number of investments that have been made in recent times that indicates the settings are positive. For example, in Taupo, Pacific TNR are building a new high-tech processing plant. In Rotorua, Red Stag are constructing a new super mill there to be the largest in the Southern Hemisphere. The first stage investment is $60 million. Lumbercube have invested tens of millions of dollars into a world-first square log processing plant in Rotorua. And recently, the Panpac owners, OG from Japan, have made a very big vote of confidence in the New Zealand processing industry by buying the Carter Holt Harvey processing assets, and they have significant plans to further invest in processing in this country through those plants. So, for the members' benefit, the settings are delivering continued investment in forestry processing in New Zealand.
That concludes questions for oral answer. Would